it doesn't matter how creative you are, it doesn't matter what great ideas you have. If you don't have that leadership that truly believes.
Hey, Kristen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nate.
I'm really excited to dig in today. We've got a lot to cover. You have some really interesting experience with what you did with both Soapbox and Brandwagon while you were at Wistia, and then want to dig in to a lot of what you've been working on at Help Scout with In the Works and anything else you've been doing there. So with that, we'll kind of just go ahead and jump into some of the Wistia stuff.
Sure.
So as you were, Wistia has been a really cool company to kind of watch over the years. Just super fun culture, lots of great content, lots of brand building content. And I remember when the Soapbox product came out, there was a lot of cool content around that and just a super unique approach to something, as a new product within the company. So I understand that you were pretty involved with content strategy and everything. So I'd love to just kind of start there and have you tell us what was that like? What was that involved, or what did that involve as you were leading that?
Absolutely. So I actually joined Wistia as the product manager for Soapbox. So when we first launched Soapbox, I was on the product team.
Cool.
And so we didn't have a dedicated marketing or go-to-market strategy team specifically for launching a product within the context of the company of Wistia. And one thing that I would say about launching a new product kind of inside of a well-known brand was we had this tension about how do we kind of develop our own voice, develop our own sub-brand, while also being able to leverage the existing brand equity that Wistia had. So one of the big questions that we really wrestled with was, is this an opportunity to introduce ourselves to a broader number of people without within the company? Or is it an opportunity to really dive deeper into folks who are already people making videos on marketing teams, to just make their video creation process easier? And so that was definitely part of the learning experience and part of what we really tried to figure out as part of the go-to-market strategy for a new product was, who is that persona and how can we either kind of explore a new opportunity for Wistia as a company, which is actually the path that we took while I was there, versus how do we, just dig in deeper with people that already know us. And so one thing that was kind of cool about it was it coincided with this kind of rise of using video as outreach and as an opportunity to better communicate with folks, personalized video and emails. Soapbox had the ability to really flex into all of these different use cases. And I think that there are other products on the market as well that are doing that. But one thing that we found is that for companies who really are committed to using video, you want that capability to stretch across teams. You wanted that capability to not just be limited to one videographer that you had. And so for us, it was really about how do you continue to build that kind of video making culture? And then how does that continue to feed the success of our business kind of across the board, because you have more internal champions than just the one video creator on the marketing team. And so that was a really, it was fun to work on. It was fun to kind of be this startup within a startup in some ways of like trying to figure out product challenges and how product market fit, just exploring product market fit, especially with not having that full risk of being a true startup where, okay, if a product fails within an existing very successful company, you have much more of a cushion than if you're out there just building something on your own. So part of our strategy was really just trying to focus on what is that new use case for easy, simple video creation, and how do you start telling that story broadly about Wistia being a helpful partner to you in making videos, whether it's big and splashy and like this huge creative endeavor, or if it's just directly communicating something like the value of your product.
That's really interesting to hear that background, because I especially when you mentioned like the sort of the coincided with the rise of using video for outreach. I think it's definitely interesting to think of that. And I think like Wistia and Soapbox were ahead of the curve on a lot of that organizationally. I think largely the shift to remote and adoption of tools like Loom and there's like Screencastify in the education space, and a lot of those that are sort of doing that browser recording, like empowering people, like you said, that aren't videographers to be able to put together quality videos. So it's really cool to hear how you were kind of thinking through that persona and that decision to kind of expand beyond marketing. So with that, like, what did that change the types of content you wanted to create? I mean, I'm assuming there was still a good amount of video content that was built around it, but knowing that that was the approach, did that change how you wanted, like, what content formats or channels or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that the thing that I learned most about the work on Soapbox is that, again, kind of thinking about something that's a new product, or if you're launching a new business, your marketing strategy is, yes, it's content marketing, but really you're having like product marketing and content marketing. Everything is just flowing all together at one point in time. It's like the content that you put out has to be informing people about the product in some sort of way, because you're making this big introduction of trying to explain who you are and how you're adding value to someone's lives. And so it's kind of like all the content that we were making was actually very product focused in some way, because we couldn't get too far up the funnel and too far away from like actually explaining to you how you needed to make a video, or kind of shifting your thoughts around what video creation really means. And I think that for an activity like video making, so many people have this, or were holding on to this idea of like, well, unless I can get a whole crew out here, then like my video is going to look like crap. I don't want to do it. I'd rather just do something else. And so being in that position of really, our competitor being not using video, as opposed to thinking about it as our competitor is a different product. I think that our marketing strategy really leaned a lot into product education, and a lot of the content that we made was about how those use cases could benefit from using video rather than just, so that was like the foundation of a lot of our marketing strategy.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think we see that certainly when we work with clients, especially in the earlier stages. There's a lot of opportunity to build content very closely tied to the product use cases, like a lot of that before you start to expand out, and especially in more like newer use cases or newer industries where you sort of have to help people connect the dots, help them understand why, the why behind it, I think. So that's really cool and makes a lot of sense. So lastly, on the Soapbox stuff, anything you can share that you like that went better than expected in terms of how you approach something, or something you thought would work well and just didn't?
Yeah, so I think things that went really well. I cannot get over the reception of like webinars and like training that we had. This was something that we started doing after the pandemic. We saw a huge increase in the number of folks that were using Soapbox on a daily basis. Not surprising, because everyone was just trying any tools that made remote work easier, or like asynchronous work easier. And I was just blown away by the number of people that wanted to like tune into a training. And so I think that, the development of any sort of classes or live webinars, that sort of thing really worked for us. I mean, people were interactive and engaged, and they had like set aside the specific time to learn about how to use a tool in a way that previously we never really took the time to do week over week webinars. I was just like teaching them from my my living room. And before that, I think that we would have said, oh, well, is that really worth it? Could we kind of do more of like something that's broader at a larger scale? Like, should we make a video that then people can access on demand? And we had that, but we really found success with those like in real time, you can ask us questions. So it was me hosting them. I had another colleague that was answering questions in the chat, and really making people feel like we wanted you to be successful with the product, I think made a huge impact, and also spoke to how hands-on the team wanted to be with setting people up for success. So being helpful goes a long way in marketing. I think it also adds that personal touch. And so I would say that would be a tactic that sometimes feels a little stoic and staid to have like live trainings, but even at Help Scout, we have classes and live demos that similarly have really great engagement. And so I wouldn't shy away from them, and that's an option for you.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. And then I know you also were a big part, or maybe led. You can help clarify that. The production of Brandwagon, which is really cool show. Again, sort of like maybe a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of companies, really shifting into what people talk about, like your company should be a media company and just putting out a lot of great, unique content that people want to consume. It is well produced. So for those who don't know about Brandwagon, that's essentially what that is. It's a very marketing focused talk show type of concept with Chris, the CEO of Wistia, and just fascinating to watch the growth of that. And so, I'd just love to kind of hear like how that came about and what your role was in that, I guess, to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So the year before we did Brandwagon at Wistia, I think he's now the director of production and the VP of marketing over at Wistia now, Dan Mills and Chris Levine, they led a project called 110-100, which was this documentary series about how you can make videos that are impactful on a variety of budgets. And so there was a $1,000 video, $1,000, $10,000, and $100,000 video, and all of that were actually used to make soapbox ads.
Cool.
Using that as like the basis and the jumping off point as the big video risk that Wistia took, we really wanted to build on the momentum of what we learned from 110-100. And the reception of that docuseries was off the charts. We won a Webby Award for it. People were coming to our site who had never heard of Wistia before because they were watching 110-100. People who are never going to be in the market for buying software that Wistia offers knew our names. And that was just something that was a really cool experience. And as we thought about what was next in terms of what's the next type of video series or content series we wanted to move forward, we thought about ways to kind of create this space for people to learn about the impact of creative risk. And 110-100 was probably, and I'm sure that Chris Savage, the CEO, would tell you this, is like the largest creative risk that Wistia ever took, was spending, no less than $111,000 on a video series that doesn't tie back to marketing qualified leads. Yep. And it is something that was just fully just an idea that came to fruition, and we were able to capitalize on how much that impacted our brand. And so we wanted to make sure that we could create the space for other people to start exploring what does it look like to make content that's different than your traditional inbound marketing funnel content. How do you go beyond the blog? How do you make creative content that actually captures people's emotions and starts to connect with them on a level that feels different than just talking about your product? Yep. And so with that in mind, this idea came up. I'm sure it was Dan's idea of kind of making this variety show that was for marketers by marketers. And Brandwagon was born from that. And my role was really helping to refine some of the kind of articulation of the idea, to do guest recruitment, to do day of production management. We had, at the time we started Brandwagon, we hadn't actually hired a full-time producer. Now the production team at Wistia is much larger, but really, it was at a time when, as the company was shifting from having a video team that was making videos for literally anything and everything, whether that was recruitment for the people team, or the sales team wanted a video to send people after you submitted a demo request form, or, all of that video that was being conducted, to actually pivoting and thinking, okay, yes, we have videos that support the business broadly, but we actually want to run a production studio inside of this software company. And that shift was happening. And I was able to kind of help with that team as they started to define what a production team inside of Wistia would look like.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. What would you attribute to in my opinion, I think a lot of others, you mentioned the Webby Awards and the Webby Award was for the docuseries, but for Brandwagon in particular, I still think the reception for it was huge. I think there's been a lot of success around that. what would you attribute to the, like, why would you say that was so successful?
I think that it really struck the right chord between aspirational and attainable for folks. With 110-100, the folks that were watching it were not necessarily at companies who could go out and do a docuseries and like that were going to convince their CEO to like send a team of 3 people on location for an extended period of time and like, oh yeah, this isn't going to add up to any type of leads. Just send me out there and let's take that risk. Right. But I think that with Brandwagon, it was something that we shot purposefully on site in our office, in a studio in our office. It was something that we thought kind of was able to leverage this idea of like, you can do short form videos and collect them all together, and those videos can be a show. And so it just felt like more of a formula that other people could follow. But the level that it was executed at by the team at Wistia was like at that aspirational level, where that it's still at that cinematic quality. It still had that. I thought we did a really great job with the guest list in terms of like who is there and how do we facilitate conversations that feel fresh and new and not stayed. And I think that all of those things just being in the same series is why it started to really resonate with people.
Yeah, very cool. And I'd say like the point you made about like the docuseries, or even just the caliber of which Brandwagon's been done, yes, is like largely not attainable for a lot of companies, or small marketing budget. But you mentioned some of the format and stuff being something that is more replicable, even if it isn't necessarily like the level of production. So what would be like a couple things you would advise folks that want to sort of move in that direction and be able to create some of that content, knowing that it needs to be done in conjunction with, you said before, like things that support the business, things that help with product or sales or marketing. So what would be a few tips that you would give to folks who aren't going to have that big budget but want to kind of replicate some of that direction for content?
The first thing I would say is focus on building your audience first. The thing that Wistia was able to benefit from, there's twofold, right? It was always hard when I was talking to people as someone that works at Wistia, a company that sells marketing software to marketers, right? Who, like, the more videos people make, the better the business is. So there's always an incentive for us to encourage people to make videos just at the business level. Like, that is what makes Wistia successful, is more people making more videos, right? Yep. And so it kind of was, there would be moments where I'd be like, okay, I know I don't have to contend with what you have to at your company, because like, of course my CEO is bought in, because this will be bottom line for us. Like ultimately it will be. And so I understand that not everybody has that benefit of having a CEO that's like completely bought in, or that it circles back to their business. But I would say that a big part of it is saying, okay, I know my audience and I know what they care about, and it's a captive audience that's already there, as opposed to thinking like, I'm going to go out on this limb and make this crazy new show, and also hopefully we get some new people that I've never met before. It's really about, I think, starting off, building up engaging content for folks that you already have relationships with. I think that that's a way to do it if you have a smaller budget. I think trying to understand, or you probably already have at your company, more understanding of what their challenges are and what their interests are and what niche you really can speak to with your content. And then I would say you don't have to start that big if you really don't want to. You can start with something that's a podcast. You can start with something that's a shorter form video series that you're just putting out regularly. I think that you can grow into things. I think that Wistia had the privilege to do big splash and then figure out how to pull it back. But for most other companies, it's kind of like, how do you continue to build that case that you're making content that resonates with your audience, and therefore are also growing the audience and expanding it over time?
The alignment that you have with video, with the business, Chris, the CEO, being bought in, like, I definitely understand that, because that's, when we were at Sprout, that's how it was for us with social. It was like, there was no question of whether or not we would have a social media manager, or like, invest in building some sort of social strategy and be really on top of social customer support, like helping people. Like there's no question about that. So I definitely understand that perspective. But yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I think really a lot of great tips in there. So as you hear all of that, like incredible experience you've had at Wistia and a lot of great stuff. So I'd love to transition a little bit. And first question just being, with all that experience you had and things you got to do, what was really enticing or attractive to you about joining the role at Help Scout?
Yeah, like as I mentioned at Wistia, the marketing team, the production function is a well-oiled machine, right? Like there's this history and this existing culture that and leadership already in place around how we're doing creative activities and how we want to, like what type of content aligns with Wistia's brand and how risky it can be and all of that. And I kind of got to the point where I was interested in solving that challenge of like, how do you establish that? How do you build that culture, and how do you start to kind of create the playing field for that to take place? And so that's really what interested me in Help Scout. Not only that, it is a company that when I was looking and when I got some outreach and it kind of this opportunity came into my radar, they had already started to invest in content. They had already started to invest in their brand in a lot of interesting ways. One, from a design perspective, I thought that Help Scout has always been, very design forward. The product is design forward. That's a big thing to me when you're thinking about like creative activities, is like, do people have a sense of like taste of what good design is? Because if not, that's just going to be another layer and another uphill battle. I'm not saying that you can't go to a company that might be ready for a design shift and, the logo and everything's a mess right now, but they might really be eager to change it. That's just another layer that you have to deal with in terms of how long it might take to establish that voice and content. So I think for me, Help Scout was at a point where they had already made some clear investments in their brand. They already were leveraging, like they had been around for 9 years making really, really great content for customer support audience.
Yes.
They already had a clear inbound content strategy. And so it felt like the right time from a like, okay, well, the next level is what do you do with risky brand content now? Like, and I think that not only that, Nick, the CEO, was very bought in to being able to be more creative than our competitors. And so all of those things made the opportunity attractive for me. And I think that my perspective on it is like, it doesn't matter how creative you are. It doesn't matter what great ideas you have. If you don't have that leadership that truly believes, then you're always going to get frustrated. It might take longer to get frustrated, but I think that for folks that are full of ideas and really want to make things happen, that leadership buy-in is absolutely crucial. And so knowing that Nick loves creative endeavors, he loves to take risks, he wants to lead a company that leverages its brand to build its success, all of that made the decision easier for me.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense hearing that. As I mentioned, before we started recording, that I was had consulted with Help Scout for a little under a year prior to you joining, and everything you mentioned just now, I think is exactly what I saw, in sort of just that perfect storm of like, yes, they had invested a lot in great content, kind of already had a little bit of that reputation, and knowing their audience, incredible design, and like you said, Nick's passion for that and alignment. That again, it's not something that you have to go try to convince constantly why it should be invested in. It's something he wants to do and just needs the right people in the right direction. So that's very cool.
And at the time there were 2 full-time people on the content team. And so you look at this website, or I looked at it in the spring of 2020, I'm looking at this website and I'm like, oh, they have like a full content marketing team. Like, I don't know who I might be. And it's literally 2 full-time people that are making this happen. And so you're like, okay, if the quality is already like this, when it's like 2 people and, freelance talent, then like, where can we go once you really establish a full team?
Yep, absolutely. So given your time in joining Help Scout, having come from a content background, came into the role as like director of content marketing, for folks who are doing that, so that's obviously a common thing, maybe a little more common lately, folks changing jobs and moving into a new role. But that's just a common thing, and I think sometimes folks don't really know where to start or have that experience. So would love anything you could share in terms of your time of doing that, and like, who did you talk to? How did you learn the culture? How did you sort of figure out how to sort of settle in and build the right priorities and get going on stuff? I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people deal with as they're changing and navigating. And so I'd love to hear any tips or experience you had there.
Yeah. I think the first thing for me is really trying to be a good listener and understand what's working, period. You know that there are things that aren't working. That's why they have this open job, like whether it's because someone left or, there, at least for my role, there actually hadn't been a director of content in many years. There had been someone that was like the kind of editorial manager or the content marketer on the team, but there hadn't really been this level of like who's setting big picture content strategy. More so it was like who's setting the strategy for the blog. And so I kind of was coming in to a role that didn't previously exist, which I think is different than folks who might be joining a team filling in a role that does exist. Yep. But what I will say is that I think it's very easy to start a new job, come in with all of your ideas and like bulldoze whatever might have been working in lieu of whatever you want to work.
Yeah.
But it's very important to understand, like, especially if you're joining a company that has found success in different ways, even if it's not success down the path that you really want, to learn and understand what is currently going on. How are people passionate and also proud of what they're already doing? And how do you preserve some of that while also elevating things to the next level? So I think that from a priority perspective for me, it was trying to understand, okay, our blog is successful. We have a lot of content that's being published on our blog every single month. Who's doing that? How do we support them? How do I find out, how to manage their capacity so they don't get burnt out doing this as only two people? But how do I also not say, okay, well, that's cute. You just keep doing that. I'm just going to go over here and do that. Like, that's very discouraging, because what you don't want to do, particularly if you're hired at the director level, is you don't want to come in and then run your whole team off. You want them to be engaged and excited. And even though they were a part of your hiring process, probably, you want to make sure that they understand that you are their champion. And so I think that prioritizing the needs of the team, understanding what they're passionate about that they're doing, what they might have picked up that they should never have picked up in the first place, but they were getting by, like figuring out all of those pieces of your culture, I think, are really important, and then bringing them along for the ride of your vision. And so for us at Help Scout, I also joined at, I think that between when I gave my presentation for my project and my interview process and my start date was like 6 weeks. And in that 6 weeks, I felt like everything about my role changed. We were able to kind of get some go-to-market research done that really exposed an opportunity for us to talk to a new audience. And so my content strategy, I know that you saw my presentation from my interview, but like, my content strategy that I thought was thinking about in the interview process was really focused on this customer support audience. But the reality of the folks that were visiting our website exposed that we had a large audience already established of folks that were small business leaders and founders that we were pretty much ignoring on our website. And so again, this is an existing audience. This isn't go out and find founders, but it's like these people are coming here and we're missing out on an opportunity to speak to them and their challenges, versus if a customer support person comes to our website, they're like, oh my goodness, I found my people. Here I am. I love Help Scout. Versus like other folks who are already coming to our website and what's there for them? Or do they have to really dig through what's on the blog to find things that are there for them? And so with that in mind, we had this opportunity to like kind of keep doing what was working well for the customer support audience and actually further focus those folks on our team that have that expertise of talking to customer support challenges by not making them also have to talk to founder people in a way that they feel less of an expert in that area as well. So all of those things kind of were happening in, again, a perfect storm scenario when I started. But I think that really understanding what's going on, what's working, and then marrying that with your vision sets the team up for success.
Yeah, there's so much you just shared in there that it's probably hard to completely unpack. But I guess a couple of things that you mentioned that really stood out to me were like just that avoiding that maybe temptation or even just like not even really realizing you're doing it, of bulldozing with your vision and what you want. Preserving the things that you think people are doing well or that they like, I think you mentioned, or that they feel proud of, maybe was how you worded it. And then also just kind of it sounds like you had some ideas, but you're also open to it. Obviously, like you said, in that 6 weeks, things changed, and you roll with it, and I think for the better, in being able to kind of be adaptable and run with that. So I'll thank you for sharing all of that. And I am pretty sure, you tell me if I'm wrong, but in the works is the result of that shift, correct?
Indeed. So when I started, I actually started maybe the same week that we launched our first episode of Against the Grain. So Against the Grain is a docuseries that Help Scout had already undertaken prior to, it was probably a full year before I started, where they had started recording stories of companies that really focused on building community with their customers. And so they'd shot 3 episodes. It's hosted by Jay Kunzo. And this was something that our internal team, we really relied on external talent to get it done. There was some internal branding and kind of vision work that was done, but we did not have an on staff team to execute Against the Grain. And so with that, the series was launching as 3 episodes. We released them, I think, every couple of weeks in August and September of 2020. And at that point in time, it was the first big kind of like content initiative that Help Scout had done to try to get out of explicitly talking about customer support challenges. So like it was really more about building community, how when you have this like major love for your company or your brand, that people start rooting for you in ways that you never really think about, and how all of that can feed back to the growth of your business. And so the audience for Against the Grain was really again, those existing folks that were already coming to our website, but maybe don't spend all day dealing with customer support. Perhaps it's a part of their role, but not all of their role. So that might be a founder of a company, that might be someone in the operations team, it might be someone that is a strategist at a company, maybe even on the marketing team, who's thinking more about like, what is the overall customer experience that we want to create? And so really, after we launched Against the Grain, with the pandemic and everything that happened, we only got 3 episodes done. I think there was an idea that we could do more later. Like, what would that look like? It's still the pandemic, so it's like, even if we did do more episodes of Against the Grain, it would probably be more months from now, an indeterminate number of months, right? Especially if we wanted to do it the same way, which was flying to a location to be in the office space of a business and like really staying with them for a few days to get that done. Like that just wasn't a post-pandemic reality, right? And so with that, we wanted to know, like, how do we leverage this momentum? What comes next? What's the next thing? How do we speak to this audience? And so in thinking about both the constraints that the pandemic put on production and also thinking about the opportunity to give people a sense of something to subscribe to, that you know that it's coming at this regular clip, but maybe not having it to be like, not having to rely completely on production to do so, we started coming up with this idea of like, what would a digital magazine look like for us? What would a new publication that specifically spoke to the types of founders that we want to highlight look like? And In the Works was really born of that thought exercise of making a kind of media platform that has any way you want to connect with us, whether that's because you want to watch videos, because you want to listen to podcast episodes, or if you want to read long or short form stories, that we have a channel that you would enjoy on our site. And so we were really focused on better defining that target audience of founders, being the type of founders and the type of businesses that are our customers, being able to make sure that we're representative of the realities of small business owners and not just tapping into what every SaaS company taps into in terms of like, here's this very successful software company that's probably run by a white male CEO who probably went to an Ivy League school and business school and probably also has all of this connections and things, and like they have a very successful business. We know that you can have a very successful
Heavily
business
funded.
when you follow that path, right? We know that's the formula. But there are plenty of other people who have very successful businesses that didn't follow at least one of those things, right? And it's like they're bootstrapping their companies, they're going to state school, they're not going to school, like all of these things that can be a part of a founder's journey that unfortunately, those stories don't get highlighted as aspirational that often when they're the reality of the majority of businesses that get created around this country in particular, but really around the world. And so we thought there's an opportunity to highlight those stories, and that is like the pillars for who we wanted to feature on In the Works were that they were gritty, resilient founders, that they, cared deeply, they were empathetic leaders, and that they were interested in growth. They were growth-minded, empathetic, and again, had this piece about resilience, that they've been through something, whether that's because they've founded other companies that failed or they're far enough along in the company's journey now that they're looking for more. We spent time interviewing folks about like what was missing or what they felt like was missing out in the big scheme of things and what content they consumed. And there was a clear gap for a lot of the founders that I knew who were like, I'm tired of reading about another unicorn company. Like, I don't want to be a unicorn company. I just want to feed my employees. Like, there's literally, I had a conversation with someone who was like, I want to keep the lights on. That's enough for me. And it's like, that's still ambitious to keep the lights on for other people or to create a work environment where people feel safe and excited to come to work every day. Like that is aspirational. So those are the people whose stories we want to tell. And that's really who we focus on for In the Works.
Yeah. That's a great overview. And I love the backstory and just hearing the evolution of how that came to be. It wasn't necessarily just like, hey, let's try to make something super creative and off the wall. Like you said before, it's like starting with your audience, understanding that, growing from there, and certainly can hear a lot of the values that Help Scout has coming through in all of that as well. So and one other thing you mentioned was the different types of formats, which I have noticed and liked as well, just sort of looking at that. Like you can dive into some of the more in-depth, really robust stuff. You have really like bite-size, snackable kind of content that's great. Just a couple quick questions behind that now. Like one, you mentioned before coming in to Help Scout, you imagined there was this large team and you found out it was 2 people. And so similarly, I look at that and think, wow, there must be a huge team behind this. Who all is working on that? Like what type of roles do you have helping you create all of that?
Yeah, so we have 3 folks that are full-time on In the Works. We have an editorial lead, and then a writer, a full-time writer, and a full-time producer. We also leverage freelance contributors for like photography, some of the illustration, also have some written pieces that are contributed by freelancers as well each issue. And then our design team, really, we spend a lot of time on brand work, and we can potentially get into this, but we don't have to. But we spent a lot of time being intentional about what the brand is for In the Works, so that our full-time designers who work across marketing projects could really be more of like the curator slash editor for freelance contributions that would be on brand versus feeling like they had to make everything every single issue. And these are things that we learned from kind of an inability. We kind of backed into like, if we were to recreate our blog, what would be true of the systems and processes that would be in place? How could we scale this better? Like, what would we do and what decisions would we make? And we tried to make all of them for In the Works. So whether that was like how you're set up on your CMS, the type of language and things that you have as part of your style guide and brand guide, the diversity of the types of assets that you use so that you don't have to lean on the same illustrator every single time or that they feel limited by a particular style. All of those things we were very intentional about doing so that we could scale and produce at a pretty, I mean, we're publishing an issue every 6 weeks or so.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's great. And you just answered one of my other questions, which was like, what sort of systems or processes do you have in place to be able to do that at scale? So, that makes a lot of sense. And honestly is, I think in a lot of companies and really any kind of content, whether it's creative or publication or blog content or anything, I think the opportunity to scale with less people on the team really comes down to processes and systems. Like
Absolutely.
when it's very chaotic, you have to keep throwing people at problems, and there's a lot of wasted work and overlap. So really cool to hear. Like you mentioned earlier, you saw joining Help Scout as an opportunity to sort of like build some of that from scratch. So really cool to kind of hear how that's come into play and how you're utilizing that now.
The thing I would add also is that I think for us with the blog, when you have a channel like our Help Scout blog is so successful, it's leading to, we had a great like SEO strategy that was making sure that we're feeding the funnel regularly. We were producing really great quality blog content. Mm-hmm. But then when we talked, I had some really, I guess, candid conversations with my team about how limiting it can feel to keep a blog that's successful going, because there's a formula and then it's like, okay, I have to follow the formula. I can't not make a blog post that's this long. I don't have any other kind of paths for creating content on a regular basis, or it feels like that when you have that like obligation on you. Not only that, but our blog, just from a structural website perspective, was really only set up to support that one type of blog format. And so over the course of the last year, we also expanded the different types of format that we accommodate on our blog, which has given our full-time writers like more space to experiment specifically for our customer support audience as well. So I think that in terms of scaling production, it's also sometimes taking a step back and saying like, what are the formats that we're producing content in? And does that give us a wide enough array of opportunity for making things and putting things out there? Or are we limiting ourselves because everything has to be a certain length, whereas we could publish more often if we did something short, but how do we accommodate just break it all, I guess, is my, like, take a step back and be willing to kind of like reorient everything.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And obviously a lot of my background and even experience now is very largely in that world of like there's sort of systems and processes to be able to do this consistently and be able to keep fueling that organic growth. It worked really well for us at Sprout, that we just sort of had different content teams. It was like the team that I led was very much focused on organic growth, and so we were able to sort of push there, but like with the confidence of knowing there are other teams creating really, really good data-driven content, really good creative content. And as long as we all stay aligned and keep working together, we can do that collectively. So I think that works well because, yes, like it's very hard to say we're creating blog content for organic growth, but we're going to stop and like really just like clear our minds and go after something creative for 3 months and then we'll come back and like fix all the traffic we lost. Like it is hard to break those motions, but I think you offered some great points too of like, what are some practical things you can do? You can look at, well, how are you limited by a blog post template, and can we create alternate templates that will support other types of things you're wanting to do? How are we doing planning? Can we be more intentional about planning different types of content within that to still keep that motion, still, benefit from the growth, but also, like you said, kind of not be as limited and some of that. So great points for sure. Lastly, on in the works, I just was curious, given that it is much more creative and kind of who you're going after, how do you think about metrics and performance? Do you track anything? Do you track a mix of qualitative and quantitative? Like, just would be curious to hear how
I wish I could get away with not tracking anything.
I didn't think it was likely,
that's a creative person's dream. I'm just going to make art for art's sake, and someone will buy it 17 years from now. No, yeah. So one of the things that we really focus on is subscribers. So it's really about, I think at the end of the day, email is super valuable. And we're not selling to our subscribers right now. I think that there are paths that we're looking for how do we introduce product information to subscribers in a way that doesn't feel like a betrayal. That's a very sensitive relationship to have with people. But the long-term play really involves, having the ability to communicate on demand with people that we know for sure are like real people, which only comes from email addresses in today's world. So measuring subscribers is like our ultimate kind of goalpost, but then also engagement, shares, word of mouth. Those are things that are picking up issue after issue. Ultimately, by creating a new brand that is a Help Scout sub-brand, we have the opportunity to increase the surface area of the company and to create a new pathway to introduce ourselves to other people. So all of these are measuring like within the context of brand marketing metrics. So whether that's from traffic and overall engagement, other branded search terms, which now we have an additional branded search term for in the works, right? And thinking about the ways that this is an opportunity for us to introduce ourselves as Help Scout a company to folks on in the works. And another way that we do that, and we're thinking about that, is how to actually better facilitate that connection across sites. But we launched without that because I think it's more important to launch and build an audience based on the quality of content that they get than to muddy all of that by saying, okay, well, let's make sure we have the right CTA that always picks us back to the pricing page. Like, it's not going to happen. There will never be a pricing page on In the Works.
Right. Yeah, and it makes sense. I don't think it should. That's a great perspective, I think, for this is, like you said, it's not that you don't track anything and it's just kind of follow whatever creative desires you have. I think there's still the focus there, but having the right intentions behind it, that it's brand engagement, subscribers, sort of building that audience, like you said, and resisting the urge to put a product CTA or pricing page on every page and every square inch of the page. So,
and I think the benefit too is that we know that founders are buyers for us as well. And they will potentially have to make a decision about customer support software, and hopefully we will have built up enough brand equity as like helpful, insightful, caring people that can be partners to them in their business's growth from what we offer to them on In the Works, that it's just a natural connection for them when the time is right to come on over to Help Scout and explore our product offerings. One thing I did want to circle back to, Nate, you mentioned that at one of your companies you had teams that were kind of broken down by content channels. I think the big picture when it comes to metrics is if you're making something that is a brand play, don't use the same metrics as you do for your bottom of funnel content, and make sure that like your leadership is aligned on that. While we were doing In the Works, on the blog side of things, we also were able to hire another content writer to help support our SEO strategy and building out more bottom of funnel content for us. That was the content that we were measuring against sending traffic to qualified pages and how many trials are being generated from content. Like that content still exists at Help Scout. It's not like we don't make that. It's just that, that is completely different from the metrics of success for in the works. And if we muddied those two things, I would be in a really bad shape, because I think you just end up not really taking a stance on anything if you think everything is supposed to serve the same goals.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think of it as like layers, and then you have, whether you think of that in layers as like a funnel or whatever it might be. But I'm glad you circled back on that. I think it's super critical. You look at traffic's not going to be the same. That's right. For something that's more brand focused, as it is something that's completely focused on organic traffic and things like that. So, great points there. Before we wrap up, if you like this episode, definitely check out 10speed.io/podcast. You can get the show notes. Please, subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and you can learn more about Kristen and Help Scout as well. And so with that, we'll wrap up. Any final advice you would give to marketing leaders, content marketers, just as they're thinking about investing in content to grow their brand, grow their business?
Sure. I would say don't be afraid to take a risk. I know that sometimes it's a lot for marketing leadership who owns those marketing qualified leads and owns those trials or demo numbers to say, let's take some time and a couple of quarters to build out something that's not going to get us new leads this year. That seems really scary, but I think it's worth the investment and it will pay off in the long run. And I think that there are ways that you can balance new marketing strategies that will lead to those leads while also taking the time to invest in your brand and thinking about things in a longer term position if you really want to be a market leader. And I think it's also inspirational and exciting for members on your team to know that you are taking those risks and know that you want to have a position as an aspirational company in some way, whether that be because of the content strategy that you're following, the values that you have, anything that you're doing as part of your marketing strategy that really reinforces that can build that momentum and rapport and excitement on the team. And it's definitely worth the risk.
Yep. Great. Love the ideas behind that. And I totally agree with some of those benefits that I think that trickle through the team and being able to kind of understand that direction, and feels more exciting than continuing to do status quo and indefinitely. So awesome points. Thank you so much for joining and sharing a lot of great information across the time at Wistia, everything you've done at Help Scout. Definitely go check out In the Works at Help Scout, and thank you so much, Kristen, for joining.
Thanks so much for having me, Nate.